Why we should be sucking more than anybody. All on this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast.
Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek Podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek Podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. I am your host, Frank Hernandez, here every day discussing all things pest. Hey, we're going to be discussing why we should be sucking more than anybody. And we're not. But that's another matter. Great week. It's been an awesome week. Or last week was an awesome week. Very, 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 very busy. I'm just trying to keep up here right now. But it's all good. We're having a ton of fun. I spent an entire day on Friday with Mark Weiser. No relationship to Bud, but he is the creator of Nature's Defense, and we're going to be bringing him on the podcast, doing a show exclusively about that, because I think it's a neat idea, neat product of rodent repellency. And spent the whole day going through properties. We went all the way to Naples, and we met there with another gentleman who had a huge Norway rat problem over there. And we were looking at all the locations and the facilities and everything that was going on, trying to figure out how we would use this in these properties. And so it was a pretty neat day. It was pretty fun. We had lunch. And then I drove back. So that's what I did all day on Friday. So we got a ton of that product, and we're going to be testing it and trying it, seeing how we make it work here for our clients. And I'm going to give you an update on it, how it goes. I'll do a video on how we're doing it and let you know how that product testing is going, because it's a really neat idea for us that we've been looking for a long time. I've looked at a couple of products in that category. Nothing really made me excited about how to use it, except this one, the way it's designed. So we're going to be looking at that. I want to remind everybody to go ahead and join us on the group, Pest Geek Podcast Listeners Group. And there we can all chat about everything going on the podcast, and I'll talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of everything going on and how we can make this thing better and better for everybody in the industry. So go ahead and join us. Go also to pestgeekpodcast.com and on the web and on YouTube, Pest Geek Podcast on YouTube. So we're everywhere. And then we also have the Facebook page. So join us there. And this edition of Harry Says, I promise I'm going to write a really good jingle for this. We're going to get the music and everything going. This is going to be a blast. But Harry Bryan, and for those of you who don't know who he is the Chief Evangelist Officer for Nices. You know, he's the head sales guy there. So I don't know, between taking pictures with his grandson and barbecue, I don't know when he gets any work done. But anyway, successful people, he says, he wrote 7 things about successful people. He says, number 1, they rise early. That is a challenge for me because I am a night owl. I do my best work at night. Like, I'm usually doing SEO, and I'm doing online marketing, and I'm doing recording this podcast sometime between 9 and midnight. So rising up really early, like 4 a.m. early, really tough. But, you know, he says successful people rise early. Number 2, they serve others. That is true. I love to serve other people, and that's just part of who I am. I can't change that. 3, constantly strive to improve. Yes. Number 4, they listen. That one's a little tough for me sometimes. Number 5, they act. I'm all about acting. I'm just an actor on this podcast as I am now. No, he's talking about acting, taking action. So yeah, you can talk about it all you want, but until you take action, nothing's going to happen. Number 6, pay it forward. I think it's important. And know their why. And I know why I'm doing this and why I do what I do. And do you know your why? So those are the top 7 things that successful people do. by Harry.Bryan on this edition of Harry Says. And now we're going to find out why everyone should be sucking.
Thank you, Frank. This is Jeff McGovern, the Pest Coach. And for this session, we're going to discuss one of the 5 primary processes we use in pest control. And of course, those processes are heat, cold, fume, chemical, and mechanical processes. And one that has to go across the borders and accompany all the other ones is a very, very simple process. And we learned this mechanical process when we were very young. And it involves the use of a tool called the vacuum. Now, within the world of pest control, I've had the privilege over the years of attending the Purdue Pest Control Conference up in Indiana each winter. And over the course of many years, I've managed to visit that event somewhere in the neighborhood of 34, 35 times, not consecutively. But this year was another banner year with Purdue. But that aside, many years ago at Purdue, I was sitting in the main auditorium in Loeb Theater, and we were getting ready for a talk by the renowned Dr. Austin Frischman. And at that time, he was also well known as Dr. Cockroach because he had been on a National Geographic special on television. And this was long before the days of your reality TV and all that kind of thing, and certainly long before the days of YouTube and all these other things that are on the internet. So Austin Frischman was a star, and in fact, he still is today. But Doc came out on stage that particular event, and we heard a whining sound as he came out, and he was wearing a backpack vacuum strolling across that huge stage in Loeb Theater. And he said, "This is going to be a very important tool in the world of pest control in the years to come." Now, prior to this, I used a shop vac a little bit as a pest control technician and as an operator. And we cleaned things up a little bit. But, he brought something to the forefront that was very, very much ahead of its time, because that backpack vacuum was made by a company called Miracle Marketing. They were located in Utah, and the original model was the little Hummer. Now, we got a bunch of those little Hummers when I was the technical development manager for Prism. And we had them out with field technicians, and they worked pretty good. And this was in the early 1990s. And I saw more and more use for a vacuum as the years went on, because it allowed us to frankly clean up the mess that we created during normal pest control events. But as time wore on in dealing with cockroaches and everything else, I set up the forced monitoring process. We got that rolling, and the vacuum became critical as the first line of defense once we located the population of roaches in a specific environment. Now, we'll go over the forced monitoring process in another podcast, but suffice to say, we would go into those zones where the roaches were located, and rather than just spraying them as we found them, we would suck up the clusters instead. And so we were removing a good portion of the problem and not stressing that population out and scattering it all over the place as we went. The process worked very, very well, and we used those original little Hummer vacuums. But as time wore on, we needed better tools, and we needed things that were far more efficient. And so the quest for the proper vacuum, for me anyway, continued over a period of many years, until I found out about a company called Atrix. This is an American firm located in the Minneapolis, Minnesota area, and in fact, their plant is only about 4 miles away from Mall of America. And I actually ran into the vice president of the company when I was at a meeting out in California, and we started talking. And he introduced me to a little vacuum, kind of looked like a green toolbox. And this vacuum used a cartridge system. And to me, this was spectacular because instead of having to change out all the vacuum bags and everything, we had a cartridge inside the vacuum that contained everything we picked up. Now, normally, when you're vacuuming, if you have an ordinary backpack vacuum, or good example, the old little Hummer, it took 4 stages of filtration to get to full HEPA. And a HEPA vacuum picks up nearly all of the particulate that you're pulling in and makes it much, much less hazardous when it comes to the exhaust. So all the crap and the garbage and the allergens you're picking up are pretty much going to be contained within the vacuum itself. Well, the advantage to this cartridge system within the Green Supreme vacuum that was made by Atrix was that cartridge was self-contained. So all the filtration and all the containment was in the cartridge itself. So that when you took the cartridge out of the vacuum and replaced it, you not only got a clean container, you got a fresh filter. And the problem in many cases with a lot of vacuums is we don't take all the filters out. Because when I say there's 4, there's usually 3 on the front end and 1 on the exhaust. We don't change them the way we should. The vacuums stink, they smell, and everything else. We just don't have an efficient system. But the vacuum from Atrix does. And in fact, they actually have 4 different sizes of those cartridge vacuums. So the vacuum in and of itself, properly set up as the Green Supreme is a superb tool for pest control work no matter what you're doing. Let's say you're doing rodent work. You're doing an assessment of the site and you start coming upon a lot of droppings. Well, the best thing to do is get those cleaned up. Now, certainly you can tell your client, you need to vacuum up those droppings before I come back. Well, you know what? They've got a whole bunch of other things to do in the course of their business. Did they really have time to do the vacuuming? Or could we simply add that to our services and become far more efficient and have a far more grateful client? Besides the fact that when we vacuum those droppings up, we're going to know what came back because we're going to come back and check those zones again for fresh ones. So there you go. You're using a vacuum in rodent work. Let's say you're doing bed bug work. All bed bug work should be preceded before application by a good solid round of vacuuming. Let's pull that population down. Let's get things exposed. Then when we're done, we're going to vacuum it again to clean up the bodies. I personally have gone out on some bed bug work and seen people leave with hundreds, if not thousands, of dead insects on the floor. Pick the doggone things up. That's just proper process. Let's say you're working with a cryonite machine. Now, that's the machine that produces the intense cold, the dry ice snow pellets, that when they impact an insect will cause temperature change to happen so quickly, it goes from ambient room temperature to minus 108. Well, what if the insect is on the periphery of that material? You may stun it. So proper procedure with a cryonite machine would be to go ahead, vacuum, cryonite, then vacuum again. Pick up the bodies. We've been doing some cockroach work with commercial accounts. We use the cryonite machine to push the insects out of equipment. The temperature drops, they drop out. Pick them up now. So you work within the length of the shortest hose, which of course is the vacuum hose. So you're using cryonite and a vacuum together. You're using heat and a vacuum together. Let's say maybe you've treated and you've flushed a whole bunch of insects because you're using a flushing agent. Why not just go ahead and vacuum things up before you leave? Because I've talked to enough restaurant owners, club owners, and people that have food facilities, and they all tell me it'd be so nice if the pest control operator would just vacuum everything up before they leave. You know what? It's not that tough. And if you've got the right unit, you're going to come out ahead and look like the professionals that you are. How about if we're doing termite work? all across the United States every year going into the spring, if we're lucky for us in our business, we're going to have termite swarms. Those things are going to be all over inside of people's homes. And last season, I told a story about how I was asked to help find a pest control operator for a friend of a friend in another part of the country. They had swarmers all over their house. And I simply said, you're going to need to call out at least 3 companies, get some estimates. It was an area that, frankly, I didn't really know anyone in. So they did that, and then they came back to me a few days later, and they called me up, and they said, well, you set us up with a ripoff artist. This was terrible, and all these horrible stories. And I said, whoa, wait a minute, what happened? And apparently, they did get 3 estimates. And the company that was awarded the work initially went ahead, did the proper assessment, the evaluation. It all looked good, did the proper graph, as they should. But as the young man was leaving the house with a $2,500 check in hand, the housewife said, well, excuse me, what about the droppings in the kids' room and over in the bathroom? The young man turned to her and with a straight face said, ma'am, you're going to need to get that vacuumed up before we get out here for service. And he headed out the door, climbed into his vehicle, and drove away. She was stunned, but she thought maybe they would still do a good job. But her husband came home from work and the two of them got to talking, and he was horrified that they wouldn't take a few minutes and vacuum up those swarmers. So on the way to work the next day, he stopped and picked up his check for $2,500. So they lost that sale simply because they weren't even mentally prepared to do the vacuuming they should have done. A Green Supreme from Atrix is the size of a toolbox. It belongs in every single vehicle so that we can pick up evidence, we can pick up debris, and we can make ourselves look far more professional by doing the job right. And today, Atrix has even introduced a pre-filter for the vacuum so we can pick up insect samples. We can get things identified, we can do some verification, and those sample chambers are exactly the same type of thing they use in forensic science for crime scene, except, thanks to Atrix producing them here in the United States in Minneapolis, you're looking at a piece of pre-filter equipment that's going to set you back all of about $8, $9, rather than what they were costing at one point at almost $50. So vacuums are critically important to what we do. They belong on every job site to make sure we're leaving the place better than when we got there. That's how a professional works. Carry that vacuum in your vehicle wherever you go and bring it into every job site where it is appropriate so we can give the clients peace of mind and act like the professionals that we are. On a lot of pest control trucks around the country, I used to see the words, free inspection. I never liked that. We shouldn't be inspecting for free. We're professionals, and we should be paid for our time. Let's promote the vacuums. Maybe on the outside of that truck, instead of free inspection, it should say, we suck. Well, maybe not quite that way. But seriously, the vacuum belongs in the arsenal of every professional in this country. And so with that, this is Jeff McGovern, the Pest Coach, signing off for today. We'll be back to you soon.
Hey, thank you for listening to this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. I will see you guys again tomorrow. Have a great one.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.